they actually thought Ireland was leaving because Northern Ireland was leaving. And that's the challenge that we face. Malta had some understanding, but in reality, it requires a lot of education, because obviously there's so much going on, and information sharing and laying out our position. I think that's one of the big challenges that the government have, is while Theresa May has made her statement, we need to make the asks and say, what do we want? And obviously Deputy Sherlock's when he pointed out the votes that took place in Westminster, what is being said by the British and what they are doing are two entirely different things. Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, said, of course the border's coming back if there's Brexit. Then she becomes Prime Minister and she says, of course, there will be no return to the hard border. Then she says it's going to be as frictionless as possible. And, we have the Secretary of State, Brokenshire, saying no special deal for Northern Ireland. And the lack of understanding in Westminster could be put in the following way, while they were trying to emphasise the importance of Northern Ireland in terms of the impact of Brexit in Northern Ireland. One of their reports, which the House of Lords produced, said that, I thought it was a very telling line, that the relationship between Ireland and Britain has not always been a smooth one. Would have to be the greatest understatement of diplomats in the history of the state. But their analysis of the impact was such that they dismissed everything that would suit us and would do everything to suit themselves. They have currently got an operation called Operation Gull, where they profile people leaving Belfast, leaving Derry, leaving Larne, and they have arrested 752 people on immigration grounds. So they've already got immigration controls between the north of Ireland and Britain. And that is the solution to not having a hard border. You will have to accept that when 40,000 people were employed in the security forces in the north, they couldn't secure the border. And trying to secure it now would be foolhardy, whereas they actually already are doing immigration controls, but at the 3 exit points from Northern Ireland to Britain. And yet they won't reimpose that. The House of Lords said, well, we can't do that for political reasons, even though between 1939 and 1952 they actually had the exact same system, where they did identity checks from the north to Britain. So and I think in relation to the funding, and I commend your great work on that, and I don't think it was highlighted enough. I think a lot of the organisations wouldn't be aware that a lot of safeguards have been put in place, but in essence what we need, and this goes back to the government's strategy and statement, is we have to be quite forthright in this and say, well, Britain voted to leave, Northern Ireland didn't. And any loss of funding to the Interreg programme and the peace funding will have to be made up by the British taxpayer post-Brexit. I mean, not to 2020, from here on, because the peace process is that important. Because, if there isn't funding going into East Belfast and you have youths who would be engaged in youth projects and would be looked after because of the funding that has been put in through the peace funding and the Interreg. And if that funding isn't there anymore, that's how you destabilise over time. That's why fellas get indoctrinated, and you have a slow return to violence as an economy disintegrates, as unfortunately is a lot of the evidence. And the same, when I say EU funding, I just mean Interreg, and that the British taxpayer should pay for that, because Northern Ireland didn't vote to leave the EU and therefore shouldn't suffer. Even though a lot of farmers voted for Brexit in Northern Ireland, again, the British taxpayer should be the one to say, all right, those EU programmes should continue, because again, it will destabilise the economy and in turn the peace process. Colleagues were talking about innovative programmes in terms of what we should be putting in our statement, what we want. Part of what we need to look at is trade quotas between the north and the south, and between Britain and Ireland. Again, Europe is very good at coming up with innovative language in order to facilitate such a process. We did have an Anglo-Irish trade agreement back in the 60s for beef and other produce, but we have to look at that, because the argument for that is, if we have a hard border between the north and the south, somebody's going to make money with smuggling people It's an anti-criminal measure as well, that we don't want to have these border checks, because if we have border checks, someone's going to make money getting around it. The same with customs checks, people will make money getting around it. So if you have a trade quota, then you have some chance of saying, well, look, we can continue to trade, because obviously east-west trade is very important with us. And then, again, an issue that's actually coming up under correspondence is analytics. This is such a huge project. I mean, Brexit for Ireland is a huge project. There are so many areas. And it was a point that I made at the last committee meeting, in that even within Leinster House, we have a number of committees, pretty much every committee is dealing with Brexit. But from this committee's point of view, not all of them are actually going to include in their final report something to do with the North, even though it affects every committee. So that's just a tick box that's, even the government, should say every committee, every government department needs to analyse how this is going to affect the North, because everything affects the North. Down to fishing, what are we going to do with the Navy? How are we going to patrol European waters when Britain leaves? So getting analytics done in relation to the best of brains to assist the government from outside and bring them in and say, this is how you actually structure to ensure that every issue that you want to address for Ireland is done, including reaching out to the Italians and the people in Malta and saying, actually, we're not leaving. And this is our 5 key issues, or 10 key issues. And lastly, in relation to the Good Friday Agreement and opportunities to ensure that in the event of Britain breaching elements of that, like, we have signed up to the International Court of Justice, but for some reason the only country that doesn't come under that is Britain and the North. Every other country we can take to the International Court of Justice for a breach of an agreement that we have with them, or any grievance we have with them, but the only country we can take is Britain. And when it comes to a breach of the Good Friday Agreement, there is no mechanism to adjudicate between the two sides for a breach. And it looks like even the European Union have pointed out that there appears to be a breach of the Good Friday Agreement, and now we have no one to decide upon. So it might be something the government need to look at, and that the North will be brought and Britain will be brought into the remit of the International Court of Justice. And I'd like to thank the Minister for coming into the House and outlining all of the stuff that he has been doing in the background in this. But it is a huge challenge for the government and for the country, just to understand the scope of it. And literally all the problems, because every time you think of a problem, there's another one underneath it. And literally, if we listed out all the problems, then we could start addressing it. But I don't think we actually have one document that says, here is everything, because that's the start. And from there, you can base policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator. And we've